Each of us have far more potential than we realize. All of us can solve the problems right in front of us, which is to say, each of us can lead. But if you have identified a problem that you know impacts you and others around you, how do you start? Do you just dive in and start solving a problem? Actually, no. Maybe when you were younger, a little child, you remember somebody at some point taking you by the hand and teaching you how to cross the street. And that person probably said something like, stop, look, listen. And that's actually really good advice. If we want to change the order of things for the better, we need to start by stopping, looking around us, and listening to what's going on. It's important because sometimes if we just rush in, we actually don't know what we're doing. Or if we just rush in without looking and listening, we don't know who else is around us who might be able to help us change the order of things for the better. And as we'll see later, collaborating with others is critical to leadership and problem solving. And so we need to stop and look around and listen to what's going on. When I was about 15 years old, I was living in Ghana, West Africa, going to high school there, and I remember driving along a dirt road in Ghana with some Ghanaian friends and seeing these huge mountains of dirt. They were like 10 and 12 feet high. I said, "What's that?" "That's a termite hill." Wow, how amazing that termites could make these huge structures. And my Ghanaian friend explained to me that the way a termite lives is every day they follow the same path. Every day they start out and they push the dirt in front of them. And at the end of the day, they turn around and go back and follow the same path. Day in, day out, they're on the same path, pushing their dirt. Wow, what a boring way to live, I thought. And then my friend said, you know, people can be a lot like termites. How interesting. And I thought a lot about that, but it's true. And what it means is that we can all get into our rut. We can all get into a habit where we just do the same things over and over again. Sometimes actually technology helps us get into that rut because we kind of get with a pack we like. We have our posse, we have our tribe, we have the people who think like us and sound like us and talk like us, and we spend all our time with them. But what we're really doing is we're kind of on our path and we're pushing our dirt. Or later, perhaps in life, we get so busy and we get so overwhelmed with all the things that we have to do that we spend all day making sure we're pushing our dirt. And so it's important to pick our heads up and look around and see what's going on around us, but also see who's around us. Looking at what's around us can help us identify the problems that we were meant to solve, and listening to who's around us can help us figure out who can help us solve them. If you're actually going to solve a problem, if you're actually going to change the order of things for the better, if you're actually going to fulfill your potential, we all fulfill our potential by challenging ourselves and solving problems, then once you've stopped and looked and listened and identified a problem, then what? It requires a systematic approach. You can't just wing it. And for me, the systematic approach that I've learned in my life is to balance what I would call clear-eyed realism with optimism and imagination. It's important, if you're going to solve a problem, to be really clear-eyed and realistic about it. Not to kid yourself about what's going on. Have you ever noticed where people will sit down and say, well, I really want to make this better, and then they proceed to just kid themselves about what's really involved? I think, frankly, we do that a lot in politics sometimes. We just sort of fuzz it up. But if you're actually going to solve a problem, then you need to be clear-eyed and realistic about what is going on, really. Sometimes I say that A leader needs to hold the mirror up so that we all can see the truth and speak the truth and act on the truth. And that's what being clear-eyed and realistic is all about. I describe that first step. Let's get clear-eyed and realistic about what actually is going on. I describe that as a current state analysis. And you'll get an opportunity to practice analyzing the current state. As you know, I believe very strongly that thinking something in your head is not quite as powerful as actually writing it down. Because when we put something down on our phone or on a piece of paper, then suddenly it becomes more real, more actionable. And so when I assess the current state with those that I have chosen to collaborate with, we write down what's really going on in a clear-eyed and realistic way. If you're going to assess your current state, that means you're going to really understand the problem you're trying to solve. So now is not the time to kid yourself. Now is not the time to sort of gloss over the things that really matter. Now is the time to be clear-eyed and realistic and complete. But we can't stop there. Because if all we do is assess the way things really are now, then they're never going to get better. In fact, people can spend a lot of time talking about how bad things are right now. We've discussed that. So to balance that clear-eyed realism, we need optimism and imagination. What's optimism? Optimism is the belief that things can get better. Optimism is the belief that people will rise to the challenge. Optimism is believing that we don't have to sit in our current state forever. We can together make something better. So without optimism, problem solving is impossible. Imagination, another word I use to describe that, or words, is seeing possibilities. And I think leaders see possibilities. They don't kid themselves. They are grounded in a clear-eyed, realistic assessment of where we really are, but they also see possibilities. In my experience, and maybe in yours, there are two kinds of people that you meet. There are people who will walk into a situation, whatever the situation is, and they will start to talk about all the things that they can't do. Well, I can't do this. They won't let me do that. We already tried that. In other words, they are people who establish all the boundaries and all the constraints that they think are around them. And then they settle in to operating within those boundaries and those constraints. The termite walks on his path. He is bounded and constrained. A lot of people are like that. Those are the people who see limitations. But there are other people who will come to exactly the same set of circumstances. And instead of focusing on all the boundaries and all the constraints, they say, but we've never tried this. And nobody said I couldn't do that. And why don't we try this other thing? Those people, leaders, are people who see possibilities. They don't kid themselves. One of the ways we kid ourselves is we pretend we're problem solving. And technology helps us a lot. How many times have you been outraged by something you read about or saw? And your response is you get engaged on technology. You tweet something. You say you like something. I remember when in Nigeria, Boko Haram, a terrorist group, kidnapped, in a horrific event, kidnapped hundreds of young girls. And Michelle Obama, who was our first lady, tweeted, "Save our girls." It was a wonderful gesture. And thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people tweeted, "Save our girls." Was it a nice gesture? Of course. But it accomplished nothing other than to make them perhaps feel as though they were participating in something. That isn't problem solving. It's not activism either. In fact, the dictionary has defined that habit of tweeting about something, participating in something via technology, as slacktivism. It's a way that we can sit on our couch, sit where we're comfortable, stay in our little termite rut, and pretend to participate, pretend to problem solve. I'm not being critical of people who do that. I just don't want us to kid ourselves. That's not problem solving. It doesn't make anything better. A leader has to roll up their sleeves and get dirty, understand the current state, and be brave enough to go towards the future state.